The grand ballroom of the Carter International Tower shimmered beneath the glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Golden light spilled across polished marble floors while the soft notes of a live jazz band floated gently through the air. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with sparkling champagne glasses. Tonight was not just another corporate gathering. It was a celebration of power. Executives, investors, and influential guests from across the city had gathered to honor the future of Carter Industries, one of the largest corporations in the region. And standing confidently at the center of it all was the man everyone believed would soon inherit the empire. Daniel Carter. Tall, sharply dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, Daniel carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never known failure. His smile was polished, his handshake firm, and his presence commanded attention wherever he walked. Beside him stood Sophia. Sophia was everything the high society crowd adored, stunning, fashionable, and effortlessly charming. Her shimmering red dress caught the light each time she moved, and her laughter blended easily with the music and conversation around them. Daniel wrapped an arm casually around her waist as they approached a group of senior executives. "Gentlemen," Daniel said proudly, raising his glass slightly, "I'd like you to meet Sophia." Sophia smiled warmly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet all of you. Daniel speaks very highly of this company." One of the older executives nodded politely, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. "Nice to meet you, Miss Sophia," he replied. Around the room, however, quiet whispers began to spread among a few guests who had known Daniel for years. "Isn't he married?" someone murmured quietly. "I thought so," another voice replied. "His wife? Elena, right?" "Yes, Elena Carter. But I haven't seen her in months." Across the room, a pair of women exchanged uncertain glances. "She used to attend every event with him," one of them whispered. "Quiet girl, very polite." But tonight there was no sign of her. Daniel, however, seemed completely unbothered. He lifted his glass confidently toward the crowd. "To the future of Carter Industries." "Cheers," several voices responded as glasses clinked. Sophia leaned slightly closer to him, smiling as cameras flashed from a few corporate photographers capturing the moment. Sparkles, if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you think of Daniel and Elena's story. Sparkles. From the outside, Daniel's life looked flawless. Wealth, power, admiration, and a beautiful woman by his side. But somewhere behind the glittering lights and confident smiles, a silent absence lingered. The woman who had once stood beside him at every step of his journey was gone. And very few people yet understood why. Before the glamorous parties, before the flashing cameras and expensive champagne, there was a much quieter chapter of Daniel Carter's life. A chapter that belonged to Elena. Years earlier, their mornings had begun in a modest but beautiful apartment overlooking the busy streets of the city. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the soft chirping of birds that gathered on the balcony railing. Sunlight would slip gently through the white curtains as Elena moved around the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She always woke before Daniel. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm toast often filled the small apartment by the time he came out of the bedroom, still adjusting his tie for another demanding day at Carter Industries. "Elena, you really don't have to wake up this early every day," Daniel once said, glancing at the neatly arranged breakfast on the table. Elena simply smiled softly as she placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "I like doing it," she replied gently. "You have such long days. It's the least I can do." She was not loud or attention-seeking. Elena's beauty was quiet and natural. Long dark hair usually tied loosely behind her shoulders, simple dresses, and warm eyes that always carried kindness. When Daniel faced difficult meetings or stressful negotiations, she was the one who patiently listened to him late at night. "You'll succeed," she would say reassuringly, resting her hand over his. "Your father built the company with determination, and you have the same strength." For years, Elena supported Daniel through every challenge. She attended his early corporate dinners, stood beside him at business events, and quietly encouraged him when things seemed uncertain. But as Carter Industries grew bigger, Daniel's world began to change. The parties became grander. The guests became richer. The expectations became higher. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Daniel began to look at Elena differently. One evening at an upscale business gala, surrounded by elegantly dressed women with designer gowns and sparkling jewelry, Daniel noticed how simple Elena looked standing beside them. Her dress was modest, her makeup light, her demeanor calm and reserved. Later that night, as they drove home through the glowing city streets, Daniel remained unusually quiet. "Elena," he finally said, his tone hesitant, "don't you ever feel like, maybe you should try to fit in more with these events?" Elena turned toward him, slightly confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "I just mean, this world is different. People expect a certain image." Elena fell silent, sensing something distant in his voice. It was the first small crack in a relationship she had always believed was unbreakable. And soon, that quiet crack would grow into a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The courtroom was quiet, almost painfully so, except for the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from a bored spectator. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long patterns on the polished wooden floor. Daniel Carter sat at the front, impeccably dressed in a black suit, his expression calm, almost too calm. Beside him, Elena's hands rested on her lap, trembling ever so slightly, her fingers intertwined as if holding herself together from the inside out. Across the room, Sophia sat a few seats down, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. She adjusted the hem of her elegant dress, and whispered quietly to herself, seemingly unaffected by the tension around her. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, are you certain that this divorce is what you wish to pursue?" Daniel looked straight ahead, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady. "This is the right path for me." Elena's heart sank. She had hoped, however faintly, that there might still be a chance for reconciliation, that Daniel would see beyond the glittering surface of his ambitions. But now, standing in the cold light of the courtroom, she realized that hope was gone. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice breaking, "after everything, how can you be so sure?" He didn't look at her. "I've made my decision, Elena. It's time for both of us to move forward. For me with Sophia." A sharp pang shot through her chest, the betrayal cutting deeper than she had imagined. She wanted to speak, to make him understand the years they had shared, the quiet mornings and late nights of support he had never fully acknowledged. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat tightened, and all she could do was nod, swallowing the lump of disbelief that had formed in her stomach. After the final signatures were made, Daniel left the courthouse with Sophia, their laughter light and carefree, echoing through the marble halls. Elena remained behind, silent, watching as the man she had loved so dearly walked away into a new life. A life she had once imagined sharing with him. The city outside was bustling, oblivious to the private heartbreak that had just unfolded. Cars honked, street vendors shouted over the din, and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, lost in their own worlds. Elena stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, her coat pulled tightly around her as she walked aimlessly through the streets, each step heavy with the weight of abandonment. She did not know where she would go, or what awaited her. But deep inside, beneath the sting of betrayal, a quiet resolve began to form. This was not the end, it was a beginning of a life that no one, not even Daniel, could control. And somewhere, far away, Daniel believed he had won, never imagining that the woman he discarded would soon rise far beyond the world he had chosen for himself. The city lights faded slowly behind the tinted window of the black sedan as it moved steadily along the quiet highway. Tall buildings and crowded streets gave way to open roads lined with towering trees and distant hills glowing under the soft light of the evening sky. Inside the car, Elena sat silently in the back seat. Her suitcase rested beside her, small and simple, almost too small for someone who had just walked away from years of marriage. Her eyes remained fixed on the passing scenery, but her thoughts were far away, tangled in memories she was trying to leave behind. The driver glanced briefly through the rearview mirror. "Miss Elena," he said respectfully, "we will arrive at the estate in about 20 minutes." Elena nodded faintly. "Thank you, Michael." Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet weight beneath it. For the past few hours, she had said very little. Ever since leaving the courthouse, she had simply watched the world outside the window, as if slowly letting go of the life she had known. Soon, the car turned through a long iron gate guarded by security officers. Beyond the gate stretched an enormous private estate surrounded by manicured gardens, fountains, and rows of tall palm trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. The mansion itself stood proudly in the center, glowing warmly beneath golden lights. It was a place of immense wealth and power. A place Daniel had never seen. The car stopped near the grand entrance where two well-dressed men were already waiting. As Elena stepped out, one of them walked forward immediately. "Miss Elena," he said with a respectful bow of his head. "Welcome home." This was Mr. Harris, the senior financial advisor to Elena's family, an older man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "It has been a long time," he added warmly. Elena offered a small, tired smile. "Yes, it has." The second advisor opened a leather folder in his hands. "We were deeply concerned when we heard about the divorce," he said carefully. "But your grandfather instructed us long ago to respect your choices." Elena looked toward the mansion, the soft fountain sounds echoing through the quiet night air. "For years," she said quietly, "I wanted to live a normal life. I didn't want Daniel to see me as anything more than just Elena." Mr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "But sometimes," he replied gently, "hiding your strength only allows others to underestimate you." Elena took a slow breath. The pain of the past still lingered, but something new had begun to replace it. Resolve. Mr. Harris closed the folder and spoke again. "There is also another matter, Miss Elena." She turned slightly toward him. "The Carter Corporation," he continued calmly, "is beginning to face serious financial trouble." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time since leaving Daniel, a very different future began to take shape. Months had passed since Elena quietly disappeared from Daniel's life. The city moved on, the seasons shifted, and the glamorous parties Daniel once attended with pride slowly became less frequent. But inside the towering headquarters of Carter Industries, something far more serious was unfolding. The atmosphere on the 42nd floor was tense. The large glass windows that usually offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline now reflected worried faces gathered around the long mahogany conference table. Stacks of financial reports, laptops, and folders covered the table like evidence in a trial. At the head of the table sat Richard Carter, Daniel's father and the founder of the corporation. Once known as a fearless businessman with sharp instincts, he now looked tired, his gray hair slightly disheveled and deep lines marking his face. Across from him, Daniel flipped through a financial report, his jaw tightening with every page. "This can't be right," Daniel muttered. "Our shares dropped another 12% this week?" One of the senior executives adjusted his glasses nervously. "Yes, sir," he said carefully. "Several major investors pulled out after the last quarterly report." Another executive spoke up from the other side of the table, and the overseas expansion failed to meet projections. "The losses are significant." Richard Carter leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples slowly. "For 30 years," he said quietly, "this company has survived every crisis thrown at it. Market crashes, competition, recessions." He paused, his voice growing heavier. "But I've never seen numbers like this." A heavy silence filled the room. Daniel looked up, frustration rising in his voice. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked sharply. "That Carter Industries is suddenly failing?" The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "If things continue at this pace," he said reluctantly, "we could face serious liquidity problems within 6 months." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Bankruptcy. Even though no one said it directly, everyone in the room understood the possibility. Richard Carter slowly stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the city below. Cars moved like tiny streams of light along the streets far beneath them. He had built this empire from nothing, and now it was slipping through his fingers. Daniel stood up as well, trying to sound confident. "There must be investors willing to step in," he said firmly. "Carter Industries still has enormous value." One of the board members sighed quietly. "Investors are afraid," he replied. "They think the company is too unstable right now." For the first time, doubt flickered across Daniel's face. The empire he believed would one day belong to him was suddenly standing on the edge of collapse. But just as fear began spreading through the boardroom, news of an unexpected development was about to arrive. A development that would change everything. A heavy silence filled the Carter Industries boardroom as dark clouds gathered outside the towering glass windows. The sky over the city had turned gray, and a cold rain began to fall, streaking down the glass like thin silver lines. Inside the room, the atmosphere felt just as heavy. Around the long mahogany table sat the company's top executives, their faces tense and tired after hours of reviewing troubling financial reports. Richard Carter stood near the window, staring out at the city he had conquered through decades of hard work. His shoulders, once strong and proud, now carried the visible weight of uncertainty. Behind him, Daniel paced slowly across the polished floor, frustration building in every step. "There has to be a solution," Daniel said sharply. "This company is worth billions. Investors can't just abandon us." One of the board members sighed and adjusted his tie. "They already have, Daniel," he replied. "Confidence in the company has dropped faster than we expected." Another executive leaned forward, speaking quietly. "If we can't secure a major investor soon, we may have no choice but to start selling off major assets." Richard Carter turned around slowly, his expression hard. "I did not spend 30 years building this company just to watch it fall apart in a few months." Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door suddenly opened. The company's legal director hurried inside, holding a tablet in his hand. His expression was a strange mixture of shock and excitement. "Mr. Carter. Everyone, you need to see this." The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. Daniel stepped forward. "What is it?" The lawyer took a breath before speaking. "An investor has just purchased a controlling percentage of Carter Industries shares." For a moment, no one spoke. Richard Carter frowned slightly. "That's impossible," he said slowly. "No one has been negotiating with us." The lawyer shook his head. "That's the strange part. The shares were purchased quietly over the past few weeks through multiple financial firms." Daniel grabbed the tablet and quickly scanned the report. His eyes widened slightly. "Controlling shares?" he repeated. "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "Whoever this investor is, they now own the majority stake in Carter Industries." A murmur spread across the boardroom. "Who is it?" one executive asked anxiously. The lawyer hesitated. That information wasn't disclosed in the transaction. The buyer used several international investment firms to remain anonymous. Richard Carter slowly returned to his seat, deep in thought. "An anonymous billionaire just saved our company," he said quietly. Daniel leaned against the table, his mind racing. "Why would someone do that?" he asked. No one in the room had an answer. Outside, the rain continued falling over the city as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Because very soon, they would finally meet the mysterious investor. And when the boardroom doors opened again, the last person Daniel expected to see would be standing there. The boardroom of Carter Industries had never felt so tense. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and glistening beneath the morning sun. Inside, however, the air was thick with anticipation. Executives sat quietly around the long conference table, their eyes shifting toward the large wooden doors at the far end of the room. Today, they would finally meet the mysterious investor who had saved the company. Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed, staring down at the busy streets far below. His mind was racing with possibilities. "Whoever this investor is," he muttered quietly, "they must have a serious interest in the company." His father, Richard Carter, adjusted his cufflinks as he sat at the head of the table. "Or a serious plan," he replied calmly. "No one spends billions without a reason." Just then the legal director cleared his throat. "The new majority shareholder will be arriving shortly," he announced. A low murmur spread through the room. "Momentlate." The boardroom doors slowly opened. Everyone turned. A pair of security staff stepped aside, and a figure walked into the room with calm, confident steps. At first, Daniel barely glanced toward the entrance. But then something about the presence in the room made him look again. And when he did, his breath caught in his throat. Standing there, dressed in an elegant dark suit, her posture straight and her expression composed, was Elena. For a moment no one spoke. The quiet woman who had once stood beside Daniel at corporate dinners now carried herself with a completely different energy, one of quiet authority. The room seemed frozen. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Elena?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She walked calmly toward the table, the soft sound of her heels echoing across the polished floor. When she reached the center of the room, she placed a thin folder on the table and looked around at the stunned faces. "Good morning, everyone," she said smoothly. The executives exchanged confused glances. Richard Carter leaned forward slightly. "Miss Elena," he said cautiously, "I believe there may be some misunderstanding. This meeting is for the new investor." Elena's calm eyes met his. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Carter." She opened the folder and gently slid several documents across the table. "These are the finalized acquisition papers." Daniel stepped forward, confusion turning into shock. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Elena finally looked at him, and for the first time, there was no pain in her eyes, only quiet strength. "I purchased the controlling shares of Carter Industries," she said calmly. The room fell silent. Executives stared at the documents in disbelief. Richard Carter slowly removed his glasses, studying her carefully. And Daniel stood frozen in place as the reality sank in. The woman he had abandoned was now the most powerful person in the company his family had built. The boardroom slowly emptied after the shocking announcement. One by one, the executives gathered their files and quietly left the room, still whispering among themselves about what had just happened. The once powerful Carter Industries now had a new leader, and it was the woman no one had expected. Elena remained standing near the long conference table, calmly reviewing a few documents as if nothing unusual had occurred. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows reflected softly against the polished floor, casting long shadows across the room. Daniel, however, stood frozen. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. The quiet woman he had once dismissed as ordinary, the woman he had walked away from without a second thought, was now the majority owner of his father's entire company. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slowly across the room. This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath. At that moment, the boardroom doors opened again, and Sophia stepped inside. She had clearly rushed up from the lobby after hearing the shocking rumors spreading through the building. Her high heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached Daniel. "Daniel, what is everyone talking about?" she asked anxiously. "They're saying your ex-wife just bought the company." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on Elena. Sophia followed his gaze. When she saw Elena standing confidently at the head of the table, her expression slowly changed. The excitement she once carried faded almost instantly. Elena closed the folder in front of her and finally turned toward them. Her posture was calm, composed, and completely different from the quiet woman Daniel remembered. For a long moment, the three of them simply stood there in silence. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. "Elena," he began, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't know." Elena studied his face calmly. "No," she replied softly. "You didn't." Daniel swallowed, the weight of regret finally settling in his chest. "All those years, you never told me who you really were." Elena gave a faint, thoughtful smile. "I didn't think it mattered." Sophia shifted uncomfortably beside him, her confidence slipping away as she realized the situation had completely changed. Daniel looked around the boardroom. The company he once believed would belong to him now under someone else's control. Under Elena's control. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter truly understood the cost of the decision he had made. And standing before him was the living proof that the woman he had abandoned had risen far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The following morning, Carter Industries felt different. Sunlight poured through the massive glass walls of the headquarters, illuminating the busy lobby where employees moved with renewed energy. The tension that had filled the building for weeks had slowly begun to fade. Rumors about the mysterious investor had now turned into confirmed truth, and curiosity about the company's new leader spread through every department. Inside the main conference hall, dozens of employees and executives had gathered for the first official address from the new majority owner. Elena stood at the front of the room. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue suit, her posture straight and confident. The quiet woman who once stood silently beside Daniel at corporate events now carried the calm authority of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The room slowly quieted as she stepped toward the microphone. For many of you, she began, her voice steady and clear, the past few months have been uncertain and frightening. Several employees nodded, remembering the rumors of bankruptcy and layoffs that had haunted the company. But today, Elena continued, I want to assure you that Carter Industries is not collapsing. A wave of relief moved through the room. In fact, she said, it is only beginning a new chapter. Applause slowly filled the hall. Near the back of the room, Daniel stood quietly among a small group of executives. His expression was unreadable as he watched the woman he once underestimated command the attention of an entire corporation. Elena continued speaking. My goal is not to destroy this company, she said calmly. This organization represents years of hard work by thousands of people. It deserves stability, respect, and strong leadership. She paused briefly, her eyes scanning the room. And that is exactly what it will have. More applause followed. When the meeting ended, employees slowly began leaving the hall, their conversations now filled with optimism instead of fear. Daniel remained behind. As Elena gathered her documents near the front, he approached her slowly. Elena, he said quietly. She looked up, meeting his eyes with calm composure. I just want to know one thing, Daniel continued. Did you buy the company to get revenge? For a moment, Elena said nothing. Then she gently closed the folder in her hands. No, Daniel, she replied softly. Revenge was never my goal. She stepped slightly closer, her voice steady but firm. I did it because I finally understood something important. Daniel waited. Elena met his gaze directly. Respect, she said. And independence. She picked up her folder and walked past him toward the doors. At the entrance, she paused briefly. But some chapters in life, she added quietly, are not meant to be reopened. Then she walked out of the hall, leaving Daniel standing alone, watching the future move forward without him.